Bored with your boring cardio? Stop pedaling that snooze cycle to Nowheresville and try some cardio that's actually fun. Supernatural Fitness, available on MetaQuest. Isn't that right, Jane Fonda?
Cardio will never be boring again.
Sweat to the beat of thousands of chart-topping songs inside stunning virtual landscapes.
Bet your stationary bike can't do that.
Visit GetSupernatural.com and join the next fitness revolution. Supernatural VR Fitness, only on MetaQuest. Rated T for Teen.
In 2015, director Adam McKay and star Steve Carell gave the world a fast-paced knockoff that hammered home the dangers of greed.
In 2025, we see if an Obama-era whiskey can bail out this episode.
The film is The Big Short.
The whiskey is Jack Daniel's 10-year Batch 3.
And we'll review them both. This is
The Film and Whiskey Podcast. Welcome to the Film and Whiskey Podcast, where each week we review a classic movie and a glass of whiskey. I'm Bob Book.
I'm Brad G.
And today we are looking at the 2015 film, The Big Short. Brad, this movie is celebrating its 10th anniversary this year, and we can officially say that now that it is 2025. And I think this is around the time where time stopped being real to me, because it doesn't feel like The Big Short should be in the same sentence as 10 years old. Like, I remember this movie coming out, and it was like one of the last movies that still made sense to buy on Blu-ray, because it wasn't just immediately on like Netflix. And then even saying that sentence, I'm like, oh yeah, that was definitely at least a decade ago.
Yeah. I recently read a very long article about the evils of Netflix and how it has destroyed cinema. And you're right. It's like simultaneously feels like Netflix has been around forever and yet like no time at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we've had this happen a couple times on this season where a movie really found a second life on Netflix, and The Big Short was one of them. This was a movie that who released this? Was it Columbia? What was the studio behind this movie?
Paramount?
Maybe Paramount. Yeah. In any case, it was at the time when Netflix was kind of like the distribution model for streaming. There was really no, big catalog on Amazon Prime yet. There certainly wasn't Paramount Plus. And so studios would just kind of like rent out their movies to Netflix for a while. And once this movie hit Netflix, it was on Netflix for a long time. And I remember a lot of people saw it there. Brad, I'm curious as we dive into this episode. First of all, hello, folks. Welcome into Film and Whiskey. I hope you're having a great new year so far. This is the first time Brad and I have recorded in a couple weeks.
Been a while.
We worked a little bit ahead to get Mad Max out of the way. And I'm shaking off some rust. And probably like 4 extra pounds from the holiday season, Brad.
I am still like cleaning off silver paint from my mouth. It was a heck of an episode if you haven't listened to Mad Max.
All shiny and chrome, baby. Anyway, welcome into Film and Whiskey. What we do on this podcast is we talk about movies, we talk about whiskey, and this season we are looking at movies from the last 20 years, and we are asking the question, does this film deserve to be considered a modern classic? Now, The Big Short was a moneymaker at the box office, and it was nominated for Best Picture. I don't believe it is in either the IMDb or the Letterboxd Top 250, but it's a well enough liked movie that it merits us talking about today.
The way you said moneymaker just begs me to ask the question, do you think it could shake it?
I believe that song is featured at least one time in this movie, right?
I think so.
Shake your money, make it. Yeah, there's for sure it's in this movie somewhere.
There are, because we were talking about a stripper song, there are, I think, 2 scenes with strippers in this movie.
Uh-huh.
And I don't think either are truly necessary.
Sure.
Like, why are there nipples in this movie, Bob?
I don't know, man. You could ask that question about a lot of things that happen in Adam McKay movies. Adam McKay is the director of The Big Short. This was his first real foray into making, I think, what he would consider himself to be making a like big boy movie. because to this point, he had been a comedy director and a director of pretty dumb comedies. Like, he's the guy that made Anchorman. He made Talladega Nights. I think he made Step Brothers as well. And so then he pivots into The Big Short, which is his big Oscar play. And at the time, I think critics were willing to go with him into this realm because he was seen as kind of bringing this anarchic energy to a story like The Big Short. And it's definitely still improv heavy. And I think it's definitely still going for some pretty irreverent laughs at points, but it gets them.
Wait, you mean that the line, "I'm jacked to the tits," wasn't written?
I'm going to say that 8 times today, Brad. The way that you say, "Witness me." I'm jacked to the tits. He says it so high pitched too. It's so good, man. Anyway, I think critics were kind of willing to follow Adam McKay into this realm to this point. And then he makes 2 more movies where he gets like successively more up his own ass as he makes them. He makes a movie called Vice a couple years after this, which is his kind of biopic of Dick Cheney. And then a few years after that, he makes a movie called Don't Look Up, which is his big parable about the Trump era and global warming. And at this point, even the most liberal of movie critics is like, this guy is annoying as hell. And I think it's really interesting to trace it back to The Big Short, because this is kind of the tipping point for him. And it's a movie that people have really unfairly looked back on and crapped all over because they hate Adam McKay now. And a movie that I really remember at the time liking a lot, Brad. Were you a person who saw The Big Short when it came out in 2015?
I did not see The Big Short. And the only thing I knew about it was that it was kind of about finance. And for some reason in my brain, I like naturally paired it. Like I let's make a doubled it without ever seeing either film with Dallas Buyers Club.
Yeah, and I can tell you for a fact, this movie is very much about finance, and Dallas Buyers Club is not at all about finance.
There you go.
You couldn't be farther off. I mean, just because the word buyers is in the title, it is not a finance movie, my friend.
I thought it was about real estate.
No, it's about a bunch of people who have AIDS and who find a way to get themselves medication when the government tries to ban all their medication.
Oh, that's basically about finance.
You know, it's a parable. It's a metaphor.
Yeah, I obviously have never seen Dallas Buyers Club. This was my first time seeing The Big Short, and I was on track here. It is indeed about finance, and not only is it about finance, it seeks to explain some of the most convoluted and complicated financial terminology that a layperson probably will ever come in contact with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that makes for a really weird movie experience.
It certainly does. And I think we can also debate the levels of success that it has at explaining those concepts. But in order to get into all that, we have to get to our first segment of the day, which we call Brad Explains.
Brad's gonna give us the movie plot with only 60 seconds ticking on the clock. So let's go ahead and hear your take with this little segment that we call Brad Explains.
Brad Explains is the part of the show where Brad breaks down the plot of the film that he has just seen, often for the first time. We know it is his first time with The Big Short here today. Brad, I'm not going to beat around the bush here. There's a lot to explain if you go that route with this movie, or you could keep it 30,000 feet and do like a 5-second overview of this movie. Whatever your choice is here, you get 60 seconds to explain the plot of this movie in graphic detail. Folks, if you've not seen The Big Short, I think it's a good movie, and I think it's worth at least watching to understand the concepts of why everyone lost their house in 2008. So go watch The Big Short, come back after that, and listen to Brad explain it. 1 minute on the clock, Brad, and go.
So you know how I often will like kind of give up on Brad Explains and be like, all right, so like, this is kind of what happened. That's going to happen from the start here. The Big Short is a film about the 2008 housing crisis. And it basically is like, there's a huge housing bubble because the banks are giving out terrible loans that are subprime and bad. And then they're selling these financial products from investment banks that are like super risky and terrible. And all the bond companies are like, or the ratings companies are like, yeah, it's totally fine. but they're not totally fine. And they're all going to the roosters are all going to come home to roost. Is that the saying?
Yeah, it's close enough.
And a bunch of people in the financial world figure out what's going to happen. And so they create these products to bet against the housing market. And they make a just rip-roaring, wild amount of money because they short the market.
There you go. All right, that's The Big Short. So where do we want to start with this today, Brad? Do you want to just kind of give general impressions of the movie? Do you want to dive into the nitty-gritty of the characters? Do you want to talk about performances? I'll let you kind of lead the way here.
I'm kind of in a weird place with this movie because I didn't walk away from the movie thinking about anything that the movie did. I walked away from the movie thinking about all of the financial terms and like what actually happened in the 2008 crisis versus what they told me happened in the crisis. And like, I, no joke, went to bed and could not fall asleep. And it was like 12:30, which is well past my bedtime. And I got up and I spent like an hour and a half Googling synthetic CDOs and like even just the basics, like a mortgage-backed security, what that is.
Yep.
And I probably spent like 2 hours in the middle of the night, like parsing out all of the little details. And I don't know if that means I liked the movie or not. Like, it definitely got me thinking, but it was less of a, wow, that movie was so good. And it was more of a, wow, 2005, 6, 7, 8 was a completely effed up time.
Yeah.
How did it happen?
So I think you're actually hitting on something that critics have really accused Adam McKay of in his, I don't want to say his latter years. The guy's not dead, but, his career definitely has had two halves to it. And in this second half...
But his career definitely is.
In this second half, he's been accused of being... using his films as a didactic tool, or as a, if you want to be negative about it, pedantic tool. I think a lot of people think he's condescending about the way he does it. And depending on your interpretation of this movie, maybe you got that vibe as well. But it's an interesting thing because it begs the question of like, what is the purpose of this movie from Adam McKay's perspective? Is it to rile people up and instigate them, not necessarily to change, but to be educated about what has been going on in the shadows? And on that front, I actually do think the movie succeeds really, really well. Like it does a good job of explaining most of these terms, and at least the extent to which we were all over a barrel by these companies in 2008. At the same time, it's super effective at that. Is it an entertaining movie? I think it's entertaining, but I don't know if I would necessarily call it like the world's most successful movie. And so then it becomes a question of like, if the only purpose of this movie is to educate or to condescend, then like, what are we doing here? You know what I mean? It feels a little preachy.
Yeah. I don't think I found myself feeling preached at until like the very end of the movie.
Mm-hmm.
Because really, most of the film, it's just like everybody is like, how the heck did we get into this situation?
Mm-hmm.
Like the further they unravel the spider's web, like they're just like, how was this allowed to happen? And I think all of that is like very fair questions that anybody of any political interest would ask. I think it's the end of the film where he basically says, and nothing has changed.
Mm-hmm.
And the banks have just restarted the same system and we're gonna crash again. And like, that's the part where I'm like, oh, in all my research, there was massive reform that happened because of the 2008 crisis. And, all sorts of things have changed to prevent this specific type of housing market bubble to occur again.
Yeah, they've still allowed avenues for banks to cheat people, but they're putting some guardrails around it so that it doesn't crash the whole economy anymore, is what it seems like is happening.
And not just the American economy, like
right.
The worldwide economy.
What we're saying is everyone wins now, right?
Yeah, everybody wins.
No, I'm with you, man. Like, I think that specifically the preachy parts of the movie for me are the words that they put in the mouths of Marissa Tomei as Steve Carell's wife and Steve Carell, because they become kind of like the beating hearts of the movie. And they're paralleling Steve Carell's journey towards, his big Grinch heart growing 3 sizes with the fact that his brother committed suicide like a year prior, and he's been suppressing the emotions from that. And so as he develops an ability to tap into those emotions, he also develops an ability to empathize with what these people are going through as a result of the bank screwing them over, and becomes a real big advocate within, the world of finance. However, like the dialogue writing for both of those characters is horrific. And it says a lot about how good of an actor both Steve Carell and Marissa Tomei are, that they kind of pull it off. But you've got Steve Carell like getting up on a soapbox at the end of the movie saying nothing's going to change. They're just going to continue to blame immigrants and poor people. And all of that may be true, but it's the way that it's phrased in such a, again, like didactic kind of way that it comes across as speechifying more than it comes across as a believable dialogue or even like artful speechifying.
Yeah. And as somebody who often struggles and kind of vacillates between really wanting to think the best of the world and thinking the worst of the world, this movie just has such a negative view of the human experience, has such a negative view of the world of business as a whole, that it just kind of felt icky by the end of it, in a way that I don't know if it represents reality quite honestly.
Yeah, I think fundamentally, like, you have a much more optimistic view on the human race than most of the movies we watch, and probably also me. And I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with a movie designed to make you feel icky when something is icky and the ick needs to be addressed, right? Like, even the sort of happy ending or the profound colorized ending of a movie like Schindler's List doesn't take away from the fact that that whole movie is designed to make you feel a certain way, right? So I think that it's really effective in what it's doing there. And it does caution that history will repeat itself if we don't pay attention and hold these people accountable. I want to zoom out a little bit, Brad. Let's talk about, I mean, you set the stage pretty well with Brad Explains, but maybe let's try our best to kind of walk through the movie explaining what's happening as we go.
Yeah.
Because in order to talk about these characters, we kind of have to talk about how the movie unfolds, because it follows a few distinct groups of people. The first person we're introduced to in this movie is Christian Bale, who is doing some like off the wall capital A acting.
Yes.
With a glass eye and I would venture to say that he is trying to project a mild form of autism. Is that fair to say?
No, definitely not.
I mean, you certainly don't want to accuse people of things, but, and dare I say, Christian Bale is an actor that I really like. And I think when he is on, he's a good actor. He tries too hard in 80% of his movies, bro. Like, he's just really going for it here.
Yeah, I like Christian Bale. I want him to be like a great actor. There's just something about the way he engages with his characters that kind of feels funky. Like, it's kind of like the Will It Funk, Bob. It's distinct, and it's Christian Bale, and it's the Bale funk, and it's in pretty much every single one of his roles.
I like that in most of his movies, they kind of challenge you in the first 5 minutes with, hey, here's how it's going to be. Get on board or you're going to have a bad time. And usually I can get on board. And by the 2-hour mark, I'm not paying attention anymore. But it's like this with, American Hustle. This movie's like this. He had a very interesting turn in that one Thor movie a couple years ago. I just think that he tries some off the wall stuff in a way that it doesn't totally work, but it also doesn't go into the Nicolas Cage territory of like, it's so bad that it comes back around to being endearing.
Yeah.
It just stays in the, oh no, baby, what is you doing? Zone for me.
Well, and the problem is that you don't spend enough time with him to like get used to it. and what he's doing. Like, most of the time, if Christian Bale's in the movie, he's probably like the star. And so in this one, it's like you maybe get like, I don't know, because the movie's like 2 hours and 10 minutes. You maybe get 25 minutes with him. 30 minutes.
That's fair.
Like, he's really not in the movie that much. Steve Carell commands a lot more screen time. And so I think that the oddities of Bale's acting in this one just kind of, they never settle.
That's fair. So we're introduced to Bale first. He is a hedge fund manager who essentially stumbles upon the fact that all of these mortgage bonds that the government props up are full of crap, that they've been given AAA ratings from the ratings boards, even though they're full of what's called subprime mortgages, and they're mortgages that are likely to default. And so when they all start to default, because they're tied in with actually high-rated mortgages, it will cause the entire package to fail, which will lead to a domino effect that will crash the U.S. economy. And so he decides to short these mortgage bonds, meaning that he is going to go to a bank, find a bank to allow him to bet against these bonds so that when they fail, he will make money. His entire character's arc is basically just being the Noah building an ark while everything floods around him or gets ready to. And everyone is telling him, you're an idiot, you're crazy, I'm suing you. The hedge fund tanks because the premium the bank charges him to have this short costs so much money. And then at the end of the movie, of course, everything goes tits up and they make a whole bunch of money. And that's kind of his whole character's journey. It's not a super compelling one, Brad.
No, they try to make it compelling by like playing Metallica and like heavy metal. And he gets angry a few times, but like all of it is very reasonable. As somebody who personally like invests in the stock market, if I gave my money to somebody and then they put it into something that was like completely unproven, I can understand why somebody who, you know, put $100 million in this fund would be upset. That makes sense to me.
I just want to call out, I'm going to do this a lot today. I think that a lot of the bit players in this movie, the people that have like 4 lines, are just killer. A lot of great small parts.
Henry Ford II.
Yes. Yeah. Tracy Letts, the playwright and actor that we had never talked about on the podcast until Ford v. Ferrari. He shows up as the main investor in this hedge fund. Tracy Letts, pretty famously, is married to or partners with Carrie Coon, the actress from Copley, Ohio, baby.
Oh, let's go.
Right next door to me. So thanks, Tracy Letts. Thanks, Carrie Coon. We can move on, Brad.
Hey, man, I'll take a good Ohio shout out any day of the week.
So after we're introduced to Christian Bale, we then go and meet with Ryan Gosling before anybody. Ryan Gosling acts as the sort of Greek muse of this film, who is like guiding us through the journey of Wall Street, talking directly to the camera, having asides, throwing over to clips of Margot Robbie.
Yes. Do you think that makes the film more pretentious? Like the Ryan Gosling? I think
that's the area where it's very clear that he's like, I want to do a Scorsese. Let's do a Goodfellas.
Yeah.
And I don't know, man. Would the movie be more successful without it? Because you do need somebody explaining things to you like you're 5 for this to make sense.
Yeah, you do. We haven't talked about it yet. We'll just get it out of the way. It's just too much of a ripoff of Wolf of Wall Street, and it's not as good.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about it. I mean, I think this is a good jumping off point because it's not just the Gosling of it all. It's not just the talking to the camera or the insert shots of, you know, keep stirring the sauce, Karen kind of stuff that's going on in this movie. I really do think, to your point, Brad, that Wolf of Wall Street comes out at the end of 2013. I think they see that movie and they go, oh, shit, this was our whole plan. Now we have to find a way to not make it seem exactly like Wolf of Wall Street. And because Wolf of Wall Street is Scorsese's biggest, most coked up, kind of funniest movie, Adam McKay's like, I got to go even more extreme than that. And the way he chooses to do that is that a lot of these cutaways and insert shots are kind of abstract. Like he'll insert clips of things that aren't really necessarily related to the scene itself to try to give a picture of American life, I guess, in 2007. but they feel so out of left field. And I think ultimately they're probably the biggest failure of the movie, is that it just seems like the guy's trying to do a Scorsese and can't quite pull it off.
Yeah. And I think the ultimate message of Wolf of Wall Street and of Big Short are somewhat similar, right? Like at the end of Wolf of Wall Street, spoilers if you haven't seen it, go watch it. It's an interesting movie. Maybe don't go watch it. I don't know. It's a wild movie. The purpose of the movie is basically to say, like, we put our faith and trust in these big names and big personalities, and should we do that?
Mm-hmm.
And like The Big Short kind of has a very similar, like, we put all of our faith and trust in these big banks and these legacy names. Should we do that? The problem is Adam McKay has to come out and tell you at the end of the film why he made the film, right? Like, oh, there's no regulations and it's going to happen again. Whereas Scorsese does it so incredibly masterfully with the final scene of Wolf of Wall Street, which I won't spoil right now. But like the way he does it at the end of Wolf of Wall Street is tactful and introspective, and it's going to go over some people's heads, and it's just a brilliant, beautiful way to end a movie. And this one, McKay is just kind of dumping his viewpoints all over the audience.
All right, man. I actually think this might be a good spot to press pause. Do you think we should try to finish out the cast, or do you want to come back after the break and go?
Let's at least finish out. Steve Carell is playing, it's Eisner in real life. What's his name in the movie?
Mark Baum.
Mark Baum.
And once again, I think a slightly offensive portrayal, if we can be honest here. Like, yeah, it's Steve Carell as Michael Scott, as Michael Scott's idea of what a Jewish person sounds like. Like, it's kind of over the top, man.
I think it's like if Michael Scott was mean and from New York.
Yes.
Like that's it.
But he's also trying to do a stereotypical Jewish portrayal. And I don't think it's really working for him, man.
No, it's not great. But the film follows them as they learn about Christian Bale shorting the market. He runs a hedge fund, and they basically try to mimic what Christian Bale is doing. And then our final group that we follow are two young investors from like Colorado, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
They're like from out west, and they have made it to the big leagues. They get to New York, find out that they haven't actually made enough money to really make it into the big leagues. And they learn about this shorting investment, and they start investing their money in shorting the market.
Yep. Those two young men are played by Finn Wittrock and John Magaro. John Magaro, we will see in a couple weeks here in the movie Past Lives, playing the husband in that movie. He's a fantastic actor. He has a movie that's kind of making an awards play right now called September 5. He, Brad, is from Stowe, Ohio.
Oh,
just up the road.
Dude, we need to get him on the show.
Perhaps one of my biggest wish list interviews is just to get him on the show, talk about movies, and talk about Northeast Ohio.
Swenson's.
Yes, that's the whole interview, is just us naming things that are regional. Swenson's, huh?
Liberties in Solon.
I actually think that they are two of the more compelling characters in the movie because they are like these young ingenues, and they have an actual arc similar to Carell. Carell has an arc. The guys in Carell's little fund kind of have an arc.
Meh. I think what I like about them is that they end in that place where it's like, we're just in it for the money, and Brad Pitt just like lays the hammer down.
Yes.
And that's like the only emotional part of the movie that works for me is when Brad Pitt, which, you know, wow, the only part that worked for me was when Brad Pitt was acting. What a surprise. When he just lays the hammer down, is like, hey, you're about to make money off of the backs of millions of middle class and poor Americans.
Yep.
Like, just don't dance about it.
It's such a good line. And the scene works because it reminds me so much of Moneyball. It's a Moneyball performance from Brad Pitt. Brad Pitt was doing this thing in the early to mid 2010s where he's like, I'm going to play my roles so subtly that a person who's not a fan of me will just wonder if I'm phoning it in. But he's doing like emotionless acting in Moneyball and in this movie. And in both of those movies, he finally gets to the breaking point where he, either has emotion or you understand why he's the way he is. And in this movie, it's Charlie and Jamie are the two young guys. And you're right. He just absolutely lights into him at the end of the movie, where he's, how's this for a statistic? Every time the unemployment rate goes up 1%, 40,000 people die. And then they cut back to these guys and it starts to really sink in. And I think that where this movie succeeds is that it starts to sink in for everybody kind of at the same time. And they don't milk it into some big string montage. But when they do that freeze frame on Carell's face where he's at the Benihana with the guy and he's talking about synthetic CDOs and then they cut to Charlie and Jamie getting this speech from Brad Pitt. And then you get that big closing montage where people that we've encountered all throughout the movie, like the family that was living in a house where the landlord wasn't paying the rent, they're out on the street now. And I think that it does a really good job of not overplaying that stuff, because I think it could get too saccharine. It could get too preachy in that regard. And they do a good job of letting you piece together the oh shit moments for yourself.
Yeah, 100%. And that, that's where the movie should sit, is more in the harm that the whole thing caused. Mm-hmm. When at the end of the day, they try to make you feel bad for the guys who just made hundreds of millions of dollars off of this Big Short. And at the end of the day, you can only convince me so much that Steve Carell and Christian Bale and these two young guys really feel that poorly for all of the Americans that they just made. They didn't make money off of the Americans. They made money off of the banks. And so it's I'm sorry, but I don't buy it. I don't feel bad for you. You made all this money. I pretty much just feel bad for all the Americans who seemingly were duped into these absolutely wild mortgages that made zero sense and they never, ever should have been offered to anybody.
All right, so it sounds like a freaking downer from us today here at Film and Whiskey. Brad, let's drink some whiskey to drown our sorrows, and then we'll come back and keep talking about the financial crisis. What do you say?
Let's get to it.
Bored with your boring cardio? Stop pedaling that snooze cycle to Nowheresville and try some cardio that's actually fun. Supernatural Fitness, available on MetaQuest. Isn't that right, Jane Fonda?
Cardio will never be boring again.
Sweat to the beat of thousands of chart-topping songs inside stunning virtual landscapes.
Bet your stationary bike can't do that.
Visit GetSupernatural.com and join the next fitness revolution. Supernatural VR Fitness, only on MetaQuest. Rated Teen for Teen.
All right, so today we are checking out Jack Daniel's 10-year Tennessee whiskey. This is batch number 3 of the Jack Daniel's 10-year. It was released back in February of 2024. So, Brad, hopefully we're getting a batch 4 coming out in about a month here from Jack Daniel's. It's been a minute since we've tried a Jack Daniel's product on the show, Brad. I think we had one slated for the Oppenheimer show. Did we end up reviewing a Jack Daniel's for that one, or did we pick something else?
It has been a very long time since we've drank a Jack Daniel's on this show, Bob.
Oh, yeah. We did Old Fitzgerald for Oppenheimer. It was supposed to be Jack Daniel's.
Yes.
We pushed it back to mid-season here. So, yeah, it's been a minute. Like I said, this is batch 3 of the 10-year. This is a product that's clocking in at 97 proof. So unlike a lot of well-aged products coming out of many distilleries across the country, this is not like a barrel-proof product. The only thing that they are selling this on is the fact that it is 10 years old. And honestly, I kind of respect that. Every now and then, I want a really well-done sub 100 proof whiskey.
Yeah, no, 100%. Having high-quality whiskeys at a lower proof point is incredible. Mm-hmm. It's like moving from that 12% wild craft beer down to a good old Coors Banquet beer. where you're like, oh yeah, I could crush so much of this compared to these freaking barrel proofs.
What's your overall opinion of Jack Daniels? We've tried a handful of their products, but I think we've done a good job of kind of running the gamut. We've gone from baseline Jack Daniels way up to some of their higher level offerings. And I'm just curious, man, is it in your wheelhouse or not really?
Man, so before I ever really drank whiskey, my best friend Mike and I got really into Jack Daniels. And we ended up going halvesies on at the time, $150 bottle of Sinatra Select. And I remember liking that a lot. I have not had it in a very long time. Other than that, I'm like, there's not much Jack Daniels that really does it for me. You know how you have an obsession with the Willet Funk?
I sure do.
Jack Daniels has a funk.
Mm-hmm.
All of their product is, this might sound redundant, but other distilleries have lots of product that taste wildly different from one another. Every single Jack Daniels, man, I could smell it a mile away and be like, oh, yep, that's Jack Daniels.
Yeah. For me, and maybe that's a good place to just kind of dive into the nose here, Brad. There's always a note of banana on Jack Daniels.
Every time.
And I think on some releases, this is very weird, but I'm going to say it anyway. It tips into overripe banana, where I start getting some off notes on it. Like this in particular, it started out really nice for me as dusty leather. There was tons of leather. It had a nice spicy bourbon smell to it. And then I got a little bit of banana, and then it tipped into this almost savory, oniony type note for me. And I think when you said funky, the oniony, body odor type smell was on my mind a little bit. And I don't know if it's the same thing you get when you think funky, but that's where I'm at with this one.
You're going to love my note. It reminds me of a French onion sun chip.
Oh, yes, dude. Onion. I don't know if I'm excited about the onion. I'm excited that you picked up on it, and I'm not insane.
Yeah, no, I literally wrote down two of the more unique notes I've ever written on a nose. French onion sun chip, which is one of my favorite chips in the world. Very weird to smell it on a whiskey. But the other one, I kind of got a bit of a Corn Pops vibe.
Okay.
Kind of like a sugary, grain forward experience. There's some char here. There's some black pepper. It's very banana-y. I'm intrigued by this more than any regular Jack Daniels, but I am going to give it a 7.5.
Yeah, I'm in the same spot. Is it slightly concerning that I got a note of onion on this whiskey? I don't know. It's definitely unique. I'm not going to necessarily say it's a bad thing. And it's coupled with these really nice sweet notes as well. So I'm okay with it. I think I am cautiously optimistic, and I'm also going to give this a 7.5, Brad.
As I moved into the palate, this is so beautifully oaky. There is just so much oak going on here. It has a really nice maple syrup vibe. It's got a bit of a nice honeyed wheat bread. It gets clovey the longer I sit with it. Some of the baking spices really start to come through. I think that this is a really pleasant, enjoyable, and just complex enough of an experience to jump it up to an 8 out of 10 for me on the palate.
Yeah, I get butterscotch on this. I get a little bit of I don't know, an ice cream cone, like a sugar cone or something when you get the triangular ice cream cones. There's a lot of sundae vibes going on in this, and I really like that. But I'm with you in that the oak on this is so heavily oaky and almost bitter oak that it's impressive to me that there is so much decadence underneath it that kind of balances it out. Because at every single point of the tasting experience, this thing is threatening to get taken over by sour, almost bitter oak notes. And I think that it says a lot about how it has these incredible, almost like a weeded bourbon kind of vibes underneath it that are kind of keeping it afloat. And I can't tell if I think that the two poles here are in tension with each other or if they're working really well together. But whatever the case, I'm enjoying it. I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10 like you.
Yeah, and as we get to the finish, the oakiness really takes over for me. It gets a little bit bitter. The banana almost turns into like a little bit of a burnt banana, like you took like a baking torch to it.
I believe we call that Bananas Foster, Brad.
I'm pretty sure we do, Bob. I didn't want to step on your, steal your thunder.
No.
I wanted you to have that moment.
It's funny, Brad, how far we've come in tasting whiskey that, like, you made fun of me for that note for a long time. And that is not even remotely the wildest. Like, that's a very tame note now in retrospect. We just got onion on this, dude.
Purple drank.
Purple drank.
There's some lemon zest. It just gets sour for me, Bob.
Mm-hmm.
It just gets sour. It comes down a little bit on the finish. I'll give it a 7 out of 10.
I'm in lockstep with you, man. It actually keeps itself from getting too sour, like we've gotten on some toasted bourbons before. And I think that banana, it definitely turns into overripe banana. But you know what? Honestly, I, as a dad, have to eat overripe bananas all the time in my household because my children ask me to buy bananas and then they don't eat them. And I don't want to let them go to waste. And so it's like, this is either going to become banana bread or I'm going to power through it right now. And I guess I've just gotten used to the flavor.
And you choose to power through overripe banana instead of having banana bread?
I mean, I'm not talking like rotten banana, but like if I want to eat a banana and there's no good looking ones anymore, and it's like, well, this is what I'm left with, some spotty bananas. I guess what I'm saying is I'm used to the flavor now. It's not necessarily a turnoff for me at this point. So dude, I'm with you on the 7.
I had a post-Christmas miracle the other day.
Ooh.
Haley made some banana bread, and we had some friends over, and we ate it. And then the next morning, there was like a quarter of a piece left. And I was like, oh, man, like all the bananas bread's gone. I'm sad. I only got like one piece because it's freaking amazing.
Sure.
And Haley goes, oh, I made 2. There's another one in the bread drawer.
Yes.
And dude.
Yes. Now, does your wife use her world famous sourdough to make the banana bread?
Sometimes. This was not a sourdough recipe, but she still makes the best, like freaking anything in the world. But her banana bread is great. I will say though, her sourdough banana bread is ridiculously good.
Well, on that note, let's get into our balance here.
Oh yeah, we're talking about whiskey. I forgot.
Yeah, not your wife's sourdough. Film and sourdough is our next podcast, Brad.
Oh, dude, we should get Carrie and Haley to start their own.
I'd be okay with that. So, balance on this whiskey, I think is fairly well balanced. It never threatens to be an upper echelon Jack Daniel's product that we've had, but it never. Like the floor is pretty high on this too. You know what I mean? Like it's consistently around an 8, and I think I'll give it an 8 out of 10 here.
I'll give it a 7 out of 10 on balance. I think it just jumps around a little bit too much in quality for me to like give it a high score. I do think that this is a enjoyable Jack Daniel's experience. And at $85, I think I'm at like a 6.5 on value. Like, I think that this is it's well worth the price. It's a 10-year age-stated product, like, from a big distillery. I think 85 is a fair price. It's just not quite there for me to be super pumped about spending $85.
Yeah, I actually think 85 seems a little overpriced. And I know that we've tended to use this maxim that we've learned of, like, $10 per year. And so it seems like you're getting a deal at that point. But even when I think about this in comparison to like a Russell's Reserve 10-year, or, like there's just other products out there that can achieve a 10-year age statement. And we're talking about Jack Daniel's. Like in terms of the volume of whiskey they're producing, it doesn't cost them that much to make a 10-year product. Do I think it's exorbitantly expensive? No. But I think they could get away with selling this for like $65 and I would feel a lot better about it. So I'm going to give it I'll give it a 6 out of 10, Brad. And that takes me out to a 36.5 out of 50.
Bob, we are literally, you use the word lockstep. I'm at a 36 out of 50 here.
Oh, wow. Okay. So we have kind of just tipped into the region of our scores where we start recommending. We're over that 35 out of 50 mark, but we're at just a 36.25. So I guess my question to you is, do you recommend, and how strongly do you recommend?
I would recommend hesitantly. I would say that if you know what Jack Daniel's is as a company, like the product they would typically put out, and you like it, I'd say 100% go for it. This is a good Jack Daniel's experience. If not, maybe try it at the bar.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think a pour of this would be that expensive. We're talking like, I don't know, $15 maybe. Like, it's nice enough that it's not a standard daily drinker, but it's also not going to really hurt you in the wallet if you want to try something new. So, Brad, that kind of leaves us in a similar place to where we're at with this movie today. Pretty good, but it doesn't seem like something that we're going to sing its praises from the mountaintops. So what do you say we get back into talking about The Big Short?
Oh, Bob, first off, you forgot to explain to the masses what a Tennessee sour mash is. So in order to do that, we're going to turn things over to famed actor Will Ferrell to explain to you all what a Tennessee sour mash is.
My favorite part is when it's Margot Robbie, not because it's Margot Robbie, but just because at the end of her thing, she's like, got it?
Yeah.
All right, now off.
Yep. 100%.
I think that's
totally not
because it's Margot Robbie. No, not at all. No. All right, man, let's get back to it.
All right, everybody. That was Jack Daniel's 10-year batch number 3, a whiskey that doesn't deserve that long of a name. Probably just like Jack Daniel 10-year.
But a pretty good whiskey.
Pretty good. Yeah.
Pretty good. Yeah.
Decent.
And I feel like I was going to say, I feel like you think this movie is only pretty good, Brad. So we're in one of those rare episodes where it's like everything is a 7 out of 10, you know?
Yeah, basically. Yeah. That's kind of where I'm at, Bob.
Well, hey, maybe we can redeem ourselves with our next game, which we call 2 Facts and a Falsehood.
Brad is gonna try to stump you, Bob, to all right and what is wrong. 2 facts and a falsehood.
2 Facts and a Falsehood is the part of the show where Brad presents me with 3 items as fact about the making of this movie, one of which is a complete lie. Brad, I'm doing pretty well on the season. I think I've only got 3 losses on the season. So your boy is well above 500 and could afford to take an L if need be today. I would prefer not to, though, so go easy on me.
We'll see what happens, Bob. Fact number 1, each of the scenes explaining financial jargon contains an Easter egg. A Monopoly game piece is hidden somewhere on the screen. Margot Robbie's scene contains the top hat, Anthony Bourdain's has the shoe, and Anthony Thaler and Selena Gomez's scene has the battleship. Fact number 2, the real-life Dr. Michael Burry named his hedge fund company Scion Capital after a favorite childhood book, The Scions of Shannara. Christian Bale is seen reading that book in one of the first scenes of the movie. Fact number 3, author Michael Lewis revealed in an interview that Paramount Pictures allowed director and screenwriter Adam McKay to make this film only if he agreed to make a sequel to Anchorman, The Legend of Ron Burgundy. Which, Bob, I want to hand out a Filmy right here, right now.
Go ahead.
Adam McKay, you have received the Filmy for first director reviewed by the Film and Whiskey podcast.
Oh, yeah. That's true. Our very first
weird?
Episode was Adam McKay.
Yeah, isn't that weird to think about?
And then our second episode we ever recorded, our first that we really released for the podcast, was Goodfellas. So we did Adam McKay and the movie that Adam McKay ripped off back to back.
Yeah, sure did.
Here we are, man. All right, I'm going to assume number 3 is true. It sounds plausible. So for now, I'm going to set that aside. Number 2, I have no idea, but it sounds fairly plausible. Number 1, I'm kind of drawn to, and it's funny because you know how now they make a million variants of Monopoly? I can't remember all of the original pieces from Monopoly. Like, I remember the thimble and the top hat. Is there a battleship in Monopoly? I don't remember this.
Yeah.
Isn't there a dog? Isn't there a little dog piece too?
Yeah, there's a dog, an iron, a battleship, a shoe, a top hat.
What the hell is this collection of things?
And an iron?
An iron. That's how you know something was made in the 1920s and 30s.
It's like, well,
just like one of the things you do the most is iron things. All right. I'm going to say number 1 is false, but it does sound like something that would be weird for you to pull out of your ass, so I won't be surprised if I'm wrong. I'm still sticking with number 1, though.
Bob, I did, in fact, pull that right out of my butt.
Yes.
You are a winner.
Was any part of that true, or did you just completely make that up?
I completely made it up.
Yes.
Start to finish.
Is there a battleship piece in Monopoly?
There is a battleship piece in Monopoly.
Okay. All right, cool.
That was the one part that was true.
You know what? There is also a battleship in...
What's that, Robert?
That would be the game Battleship.
Ah, yes.
So I was thinking of those kinds of ships, and I was like, there's not one of those in Monopoly. Come on. All right, man, let's get back into talking about this movie as much as is necessary to finish out this episode, because I think that we've kind of established what we think of Adam McKay, what we think of the acting in this movie, what we think of the overall success of the film. What is there left to talk about here, Brad?
Nothing. Final scores.
What'd you think of the random cutaways to celebrities to explain complicated financial things?
I liked them. They once again feel like a ripoff from Scorsese. I think that the thing I was most confused about and still don't totally understand is the synthetic CDO. That is a wild thing. And I understand the idea of the banks betting that what Christian Bale and the others are betting will happen won't happen. Like they're betting against what they're thinking is going to happen. But the actual mechanics of how they did it is the part that I'm still I don't know if I understand.
I think
what's happening.
That particular scene in this movie is probably the most poorly paced scene in the movie, because it's supposed to be the real tipping point. And there's a line that Gosling has as narrator, because you're sitting in this Benihana watching Steve Carell talk to this CDO manager. And it is slowly revealed, because this guy is such a big pompous douche, that we're not even talking about betting on mortgages anymore. There is a mortgage insurance market that is being bet on that is actually 20 times bigger than the mortgages themselves. And because there is so much kind of shady betting going on these things, that if these underlying bonds fail, it's going to be 20 times bigger of a fallout than we could have possibly imagined. And they were already imagining it was going to tank the American economy. And so Gosling says something like, if the CDOs were the match and these tranches or whatever were the fuse, then the synthetic CDOs were the atomic bomb. But it's so much information so quickly after you've already been kind of struggling to keep up that it becomes such an avalanche of information for me that I almost, my brain almost is just I can't follow this anymore, dude. I know this is bad, but I can no longer grasp the gravity of how bad this is. And I know how it ends. So I guess this is the thing that tipped us into financial crisis. But
yes,
and
that's the problem with the movie, is that it strives to not lose you in the jargon, and then it does. And because, like you said, I didn't think of it before, but because the outcome, it's kind of well, I'm here for the technical stuff. I know what happens. I know the devastating impact that this event has on America. What I don't know is the technical elements of what's going on, and you've been trying to tell me these technical elements the whole freaking movie. And so now you've just spun it out into oblivion, and it's chaos and a maelstrom, and I don't understand what's going on. And so the rest of the movie, I was just sitting there going, what the heck is a synthetic CDO?
Yeah, man.
Not, oh my gosh, look at the impact that this event is having.
The Big Short is one of the all-time great YouTube clip movies. When I'm scrolling through YouTube Shorts, it comes up a lot. But even if you just type in like The Big Short clips, every good scene in this movie is on YouTube, and it is like perfectly structured for like 6-minute clips where you get an entire financial term explained to you with an appearance by Margot Robbie or Anthony Bourdain or whatever. And you get, all the characters at the end going, oh my God, this is going to be so bad for the economy. And then the clip's over. And I think that seeing the movie again strung together with all those clips in its totality this time through made me kind of wonder how this works as a movie instead of just as short lessons that you could watch on YouTube. And I've never really had this experience. We've had a couple movies where I've talked about the YouTube ability of the movie, but this almost is like an online training module of a movie. And I think it works better in like 8-minute chunks than it works as a 2-hour movie.
Yeah, 100%. And a lot of those individual scenes are great and interesting and funny and informative and dreadful and all of these things. I don't think that the sum of all the parts is greater, or the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. Like, the whole is lesser than the sum of the parts. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Brad, I think this is a really good spot for us to get into our final segment of the day, which we call Let's Make It a Double.
We're near the end of the episode, so thanks for listening to the Film and Whiskey Show. Let's pair another film with this one, even if it's a struggle. It's our final segment of the day, now let's make it a double.
Let's Make It a Double is presented by Blackwood Distilling Company. It's the part of the show where we pick a movie to pair up with this one to make the perfect double feature. Brad, the reason I said I think this is a good time to get into Let's Make It a Double is because at the end of the day, as much as this movie mimics Scorsese in a lot of ways, I actually think the person that Adam McKay is ripping off the most is the documentary filmmaker Michael Moore. Do you remember when Michael Moore was a thing in like the mid-2000s? He had that movie that he made about George Bush, Fahrenheit 9/11,
mm-hmm.
and it was a documentary that made $250 million at the box office. Like, it was a big deal. And he got booed off stage, I think, at the Golden Globes that year. Like, it was a crazy time to be a documentary filmmaker. Michael Moore does a very particular kind of documentary, which I don't think you can really even call documentary. He takes real life people and puts them in manufactured scenarios as his way of proving a didactic point about something. And so Fahrenheit 9/11 is a lot more archive footage, but he made a movie called Sicko a couple of years after that kind of tackled the healthcare crisis in the United States. And one of the big centerpieces of that movie is a lot of victims' families from 9/11 were denied medical care for the victim on site. And Michael Moore orchestrated an illegal trip for all these people to Cuba to receive medical care as his way of demonstrating that even Cuba has better healthcare than the United States. And it's this big sensationalist way of making movies. Now, did these people receive real healthcare? Were these actual people? Yes. But it's also this like incredibly manufactured, over sensationalized way of making a point. And this entire movie feels so similar to how Michael Moore makes movies that it's almost like you could give Michael Moore a budget and say, your job is to film recreations of things that really happened, where Steve Carell is playing the recreator. And that's what this is. And I think that was kind of the key for me to understand what doesn't totally work about this movie for me, is that it feels like a high budget recreation than it feels like people acting a movie out. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%, dude. There's so many parts of this film that just leave me wanting a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I'm with you. Are you pairing this officially with a Michael Moore film then?
Yeah, I think it probably pairs best with Sicko, a movie that I actually kind of like by Michael Moore. So if you're ever going to dip your toe into the world of Michael Moore, I'll say I'll pair The Big Short with Sicko.
I think for me, I'm just going to go completely out into left field, maybe over the fence, maybe a foul ball. Who knows? We're going to pair this primarily because I just want to watch like a political thriller paired with this movie. I'm going to go with The Manchurian Candidate.
Which one? The original or the Denzel?
You know what? Because The Big Short is a lesser version of Wolf of Wall Street, I'm going to go with the lesser version of The Manchurian Candidate and say the newer one.
The Denzel Washington version. I love it, dude. All right, so Brad's picking Manchurian Candidate 2.0. I'm picking Sicko. I will say that there are some really good movies that have been made over the last 15 years about the financial crisis. There's a really good documentary called Inside Job that's about this whole thing. There's a movie called Margin Call, which is an actual movie, and it is a dramatized, fictionalized movie about the way that this all went down, where it takes place inside of a fictional bank and how the banks moved their money around to cover up the fact that people were shorting them and how that act ultimately caused the bottom to fall out. It's a movie where Jeremy Irons plays the CEO of the bank. You've got Stanley Tucci in this movie. Kevin Spacey's in the movie. It's stacked. It's an incredible movie, Brad. It's like an hour and 45 minutes. You're in, you're out. I would highly recommend you watch Margin Call.
Why didn't you make that your let's make it a double, Bob?
Because I actually want to pair it with the Michael Moore movie. But I also want to suggest that people try out Margin Call. It's an underseen movie.
Okay. Well, I'm going to go watch Margin Call because that sounds fascinating and I like all of the actors that you named. So I'm in.
There you go. Let's Make It a Double was brought to you by Blackwood Distilling Company. No matter what movie you pick to pair this with, you can always make it a double with Blackwood Distilling Company. Brad, final scores. I think this movie, I talked myself down. I was at like a 7.5 because I do think it's a well-made movie. And I think that it is ultimately successful, but I think I'm going to come all the way down to a 7 on this one.
I'm right there with you, Bob. This is a 7 out of 10. Well-made movie, entertaining, got me thinking, kept me up half the night. But overall, I don't know if I really want to come back to it.
As I look out at our movies for the rest of this season, there's a lot of 2015 films here. And I didn't realize how good of a movie year 2015 was, but you know, we did The Revenant already a couple seasons ago. We just did Fury Road last week. We're doing The Big Short this week. In a couple weeks, we'll be looking at Inside Out. That was a 2015 film. We'll be watching Creed, the boxing film. And then we're going to be watching the Best Picture winner, Spotlight, a little bit later on this season. It'll end up being one of our most represented years on Film and Whiskey.
Yeah, that is absolutely wild. Apparently, there's a lot of opportunities for 2015 to become the epitome of a modern classic type of year.
You know it, man. So all that said, it's a 7 from us on The Big Short, but we'd like to know what you think. Has this movie stuck with you? And crucially, have you seen this movie as a movie lately, or have you just been watching it on YouTube like I have? I'd like to hear from you. You can find us on any of our social medias: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, or YouTube at Film Whiskey.
Or if you want to join the conversation, you can join us on our Discord server. We are on there every single day talking about the Film and Whiskey podcast. So if you want to join the conversation, there's a link at the end of every single one of our show notes.
I talked earlier about the Ohio native John Magaro and how he is in one of my favorite movies of all time. We're going to be watching that movie next week. It's 2023's Past Lives. Brad, I am freaking pumped for this one, dude.
Let's go, dude. I am very, very excited to watch this on a normal size screen that is not the back of an airplane seat.
So join us for Past Lives next week. But until then, I'm Bob Book.
I'm Jack to the tits!
And we'll see you next time.